Today, we'd like to share a resource that Yanka and I use to help us think about and continue to grow in our relationship. Her podcast is bite-sized, and the episodes give us a lot to think about and are short enough to really encourage conversation. Rhoda's website, therapyideas.net, has a host of resources that I've used to expand my knowledge and learn new ways of approaching personal challenges. Particularly awesome are her TV show and movie lists, which give you movies and shows that highlight various conditions affecting relationships, as well as her book list of self-help books addressing various challenges. All right, so could you share with us a little the impetus for you creating the website, the app, the podcast? Yanka and I are enjoying them so much. What inspired you to do that?
Well, because I've spent 38 years in private practice working with one or two people at a time. And it really, as you age, I'm 66, and as you age, you really want to influence a larger number of people. And I am a social worker, and I really believe one of our primary belief systems is trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So honestly, that's what it's about. I don't expect to make money. I'm not trying to make money, but I am trying to spread healthy information and educate people so they can grow.
Beautiful. Well, I can tell you, I've passed it along to some of the veterans I work with, and just Yanka and I, just listening to it when we're in bed, we'll play a podcast or something, and it gives us stuff to think about and talk about. So we really appreciate it. Now,
it's nice to be appreciated. I don't get a lot of audience feedback, so I seriously do appreciate that you reached out to me.
Got it. Now, one thing that I kind of resonated with that you talked about is when you mentioned how individuals kind of get stuck in their own personal narratives.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I was actually reading a book by called The Death of Truth in the Age of Trump by Machinko Kukatani, and I'm sure I just crucified pronouncing her name. She was the New York Times book editor for 20 years, and she talked about how she thinks the problem is that for the last 20 to 30 years, we've really been caught up in our own personal realities. And that really made me think about how much in couples I'm a bridge between two completely different realities. And I'm pretty good at it because I've been doing it a long time and I really enjoy it. I think a lot of couples therapists don't really enjoy the work. And I like people. I think people are fascinating. I enjoy, helping them bridge those two different realities. And it really is like a puzzle. And when you can help people see each other more accurately, we kind of have these tapes in our head where we're running through that son of a gun, he did this and yada, 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 and we just got this little narrative going. And then everything that happens fits into this stuck narrative. And a lot of what couples work is about is opening that up so that it's not a closed system. It needs to be open. And the more you can do that and help people, wait a second, that isn't exactly what happens. Here's where this person was coming from. Here's where this person is coming from. And let me help you see each other more accurately. And then, of course, I do use my imagination a lot I think partners need to do that. I don't think they use their imagination. He's not just being a grumpy person today for no reason at all. What's behind it? Or what happened with somebody else that's making that stuck place tough for him or her?
Now, okay, so if you don't mind, I want to talk a little bit about episode 47, which is fantastic, by the way. I'm particularly interested when you talk about having 20 conversations to explore points of view, to avoid building up resentments. For those of us listening and trying to practice this, could you tell us a little more or point us to some tools that can help us develop that habit?
Reducing defensiveness is a really tricky thing. I mean, everybody's defensive and everybody's, like, well, wait a minute, you're attacking me. And it's like, whoa, no, that's not what's happening here. But when there's a disagreement, particularly if it's important, like let's just pick having children. My sense of a couple is usually when one person is ready and wants children, the other person is kind of digging their feet in and going, no, wait a second. Then when the other person starts to say, yeah, I think I might want to have kids now, the other person goes, whoa, wait a second. And it's like the energy has to go back and forth in a relationship till you can kind of find this middle ground place where you both can agree. But it involves a tremendous number of conversations. So for that topic, you might need 75 or 100 conversations over 2 or 3 years. And I think people do this short circuit thing. They avoid, they deflect, they don't want to talk about hard things. And I just think hard things is really important, and you're like, think of it like chewing your food, you're not just swallowing it whole. So if you can think about, well, how could I say my point of view in a more vulnerable way? Because I'm kind of coming at you. And so what's a way I could say this is really important to me because I'm scared that with my age that my risk factors are going to go up. So I'm feeling that clock and it's really scaring me. But instead of going, you are trying to interfere with my life and you don't understand and, pointing the finger, so to speak, and being able to open that up so that you can really hear some of that vulnerability. So there is a technique I do give to people when they're arguing. And what I ask people to do, not very many people do it, I will say that, because you're in the heat of a moment. But either person can kind of do a T for timeout. And then each of you sit down and write down, what is it that's important to you about whatever the argument is? And then write down, what do you think is important to the other person? And here's how that technique is useful. It stops the emotions. Emotions are loaded, and emotions are exaggerated. And what I want to do is get people thinking. And instead of kind of, write down what's important to you, and then you kind of got that off the table. Mm-hmm. And then can you actually think about what might be important to the other person? So it's kind of like a little yellow caution light, and it gives you a chance to shift from emotions to thinking. And I think that's a really valuable skill. And I think that's what I do in the office. People are, yelling, and I'm like, okay, wait a second, and let's think about this a little bit. But that defensive, insecure, that stuff just is ready to explode.
Got it. Now, for the audience members, that's the T for timeout. I'm going to put that process down at the end so you'll have it. But one thing that sticks with me, and the last episode I listened to you, Rhoda, you mentioned how I think it was your therapist told you to schedule at least 2 times a month.
Yes.
Right, a date night with your husband, and you went and got a babysitter, you did it, whatever, and you've been telling couples that story again, but they never do it.
No, they don't. I can't tell you how many times they couldn't. And I'm like, really? Seriously? I mean, okay, put the kid in a stroller and take a walk for half an hour. Talk to each other, spend a little time together. And I'm just amazed. I get very defeated with that request. And I'm serious. My therapist said that, and I went home and did it, and it helped tremendously.
All right. So I'm asking my audience, the next time you're in a heated argument, do the T for timeout, and we're going to put the kind of instructions down there again so you have it. But actually do it. Take advantage of it to get you to expand a little bit on is the difference between dialogue and parallel conversations. And I think you gave a slight example, that last one, but if you could expand on it for us.
Sure. So I think a lot about how when people are talking with each other, and it's almost like two ships passing in the night. One person says their spiel, and then the other person says their spiel, and they're almost kind of waiting to talk instead of listening to what the other person is saying. And I think I call that parallel monologues. And I think real dialogue means when you're listening to somebody, you're influenced by them. Something strikes you. So you build on what they say, not just getting ready to talk about what you want to say. That you say, that's really interesting. Well, let me think about that for a second. You shift where you are because you really heard something the other person said. And it makes all the difference in the world. And I just don't see often dialogue. I will say, Madam Secretary, they seem to have real dialogue with each other. The husband and the wife, I forgot the star's name. But they really do seem to influence each other and come back to things when they're angry with each other. In the new movie, Crazy Rich Asians, which is a great, fun movie, rom-com. It's just so much fun. I really enjoyed it. My husband, not so much. It might be a little bit of a chick flick, but I really liked it. There's two moments of integrity, and they really influence the two people who are in love, really influence each other and really say important things to each other and listen and do something different because of the conversation. And I think the biggest sign of respect you can give somebody else is when you are influenced by somebody else and you shift gears a little bit. You don't have to go from the left to the right or the right to the left, but you're open and thinking about it in a different way. And that's what I call contact. And those moments, I think, are all too rare in relationships.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. So I'm just going to encourage our fans and people that are listening to us, please check out therapyideas.net. Check out the podcast, download the app. She's got a new app out. We'll put links to all that down there. I will tell you, in episode 47, one of the things that I took away, and I'm attaching a graphic with this, is 5 mandates for effective partnership. I thought that was really cool, and so we're going to give that out. One thing I really enjoy, Rhoda, about your podcast is typically I don't think it's every podcast, but a lot of them, you'll give a challenge for Janka and I to kind of do. And so I'm wondering if you have a challenge for our audience.
Well, I think that it'd be really good to stop and think about when was the last time you had a hard conversation about something that bothers you. I mean, a lot of people give up on their sex life, for example. And I had a woman say to me yesterday, I had given a speech to a group, and she said, you know what my husband really liked, of course. And I said, I looked at her and I smiled and I said, I talked about how people are missing out on sex. And she said, yes, he really liked that. And I, not so much, but she came in to see me. And, but I think thinking about what bothers you, what's missing, how could your relationship be better? And any of those questions and just starting a conversation, even being able to say to go home and say to your partner, if you had 2 ways that you can make our relationship better, what would they be? And then you offer up your 2 ideas, but you also respect and ask the other person their 2 ideas. And then really try to think about how can you make those things happen more often or better or whatever, depending on what it is that they've asked for. But I had a young couple ask me once, what do you think is really important that will help us stay married the longest? And I said, having conversations about hard things. We live in a world where people avoid and deflect, and they aren't authentic enough about what bothers them. And the more you practice it and the more information you get, the more interesting and the more vibrant and the more chances you have of relationship longevity. And it's work.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank
I
you so
really
much.
appreciate you asking me. Thank you very much for having me.